Hey, deserving listeners, Jorge and Anfisa, let's watch.
I don't think it's like a lie, it's like a miscommunication thing.
What do you mean miscommunication? Like about small things?
Lying would be included miscommunication.
It's about small things and big things.
How does that make you feel? How do you feel when he's unreliable?
Pissed. Feels like I can trust him.
Okay, so the concern here is that she wants to come to therapy more than he does, I think, from the way they're framing it. And that's often the case. Not only that one individual in the room as a couple will be less interested. Sometimes one of the individuals is very uninterested. They're being absolutely dragged into the session. And there's different degrees of that, of course, and different individuals have different comfort level with therapy and different levels of differentiation, maybe. But anyway, another commonality is that often in heterosexual relationships, the women are the ones that are more interested in therapy than men. There are a lot of reasons for this. One is that men have been socialized not to ask for help, not to recognize their emotions, not to want to give up power. Men will be afraid of handing over control and power to someone else to evaluate them. Women are, generally speaking, much more comfortable with that. So they're falling in line with that common presentation. So she brings up lying. You know, that would be a pretty big thing to hear from a couple, that she says he lies all the time, and he's like, well, yeah, I guess it's miscommunication. Now, if I heard that, I would be like, that's interesting, especially for him to kind of admit it. But I hope that the therapist picks up on, because I think the lying was in a context of fear for him. You could say it's justified or not, but at least I think for George, he believes that there's a justification for that, a worry that she is going to punish him physically or emotionally if he doesn't obey her, and so he has to lie to be able to leave the house or to talk to people, or, you know, that kind of thing. I hope that that is touched on.
You not telling the truth is a way of controlling her feelings. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think they edit it pretty severely. I have a hard time believing that this is all happening within the first 25 seconds of the first session. But yeah, that idea is common. I don't know if we've heard enough to be able to indicate that, but yeah. So when people will lie to their partners, and I guess it does kind of apply to him, that he, for example, when he lied about leaving the house that one time, and he said he was just going to the garage, and then he disappears, and he was going to meet with people that were in support of him. And so he was lying to manage her feelings as a way of trying to control, I guess is one word for it. But he didn't want her to get upset and didn't want her to punish him emotionally or physically for trying to get support outside of their relationship. At least that's the way he framed it. I don't know if that's true or not, but that's the way he framed it.
Yeah. You not telling the truth is a way of controlling her feelings. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
She's frustrated. She just wants a guy she can trust. She wants consistency. And can you do that?
Yeah, who knows? It's probably heavily edited if we could talk to him, or if we had just a static video of the episode, which wouldn't be very interesting in all likelihood. Sessions, the intensity and the interest is happening within the individuals involved. If you just watch a session, it's not typically very riveting. Take it from me as a supervisor, I observe my supervisees' sessions in video format, sometimes audio, and a lot of things can be happening internally and externally, and a lot of relation stuff between therapist and client, a lot of discoveries, a lot of emotions, but to watch it, it doesn't hold a lot of drama. It's one of the things that I think is a problem for our industry, because people want to dramatize things, right? You have the fire departments that are dramatized, or a hospital environment that is dramatized, or a police department that is dramatized, or a law firm that is dramatized. And so, of course, Hollywood turns to us and tries to dramatize us. And there's just not a lot of visual drama or drama that you will feel if you're watching. I mean, certainly there are moments, but take it from me as, when I'm in session as a client or a therapist, a lot of things are happening. It's very turbulent and interesting and moving and intense, it often is. And yet, to watch it from the outside, it's hard to feel it. It's hard to identify with it. So what Hollywood will do to try to create drama is to create unethical therapists who are having sex with their clients or trying to kill their clients or spying on their clients. And it's the only way they can make it interesting, whereas a law firm, I'm guessing, but particularly like a hospital and an ER department or a fire department or police department, it's interesting to watch even if you're not involved, because it's physical, you're out and about, you're running through the hallways of the hospital, 30 cc's of blah, 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 stat, and people, life and death is on the line. And so, there's a lot happening. And so the average depiction of someone in my field is someone that is doing horrific things. Or there are some very rare examples. Like one of the best examples of therapy is in Good Will Hunting with Robin Williams and Matt Damon. And yet, that's one of my favorite depictions of a therapist. I'm not really like Robin Williams as a therapist. Anyway, I like that depiction. He doesn't want to have sex with Matt Damon. That's a plus. It's like they almost always want to have sex with their clients. Not that doesn't happen, because it does, but it's statistically kind of rare. Anyway, but in that movie, Robin Williams, the therapist, strangles Matt Damon at one point when Matt Damon's character is trying to aggravate Robin Williams as a therapist, and Robin Williams just lashes out and tries to strangle him. And, one of the best depictions of therapy that I can find involves a therapist that physically, criminally assaults one of his clients. Now, there are others, like in Ordinary People, that therapist from my memory, but I haven't seen that movie in a long time. There are a couple others, but so the session is being edited in all likelihood to make it more interesting, so I can't know what really happened. There's a chance that George, is in an abusive relationship. You would not want to out or criticize a victim for lying to get out of abuse, right? In a traditional sort of more mainstream example, if you have a woman who's being victimized by a man in a heterosexual relationship, and the man is preventing her from having contact with her friends and family, and is scary and physical and violent and emotionally abusive and verbally abusive and highly volatile. And she, as the victim, the wife, were to lie to him so that she could talk to a lawyer or talk to her family or something along those lines, then we would not fault her for that. And so I don't know if that's what's happening here. It's the way it's depicted. I can't even from that tell. I'd have to ask George, what's going on? Does he feel safe? That kind of thing. And you don't want to look at the victim in that situation and say, there's something wrong with you. You have to change that. Can you please tell the truth? Because if you ask a victim to tell the truth, that could literally result in them being harmed, abused, potentially even killed. I mean, there are rare but examples of abusive individuals murdering their spouse when they will push back or are honest with the abusive person. So now, that's an extreme example. Usually lying is not just something that people decide to do and have control over, so to speak. Lying is something that people do out of desperation, either the current situation or they were in a desperate situation when they were younger and have just habitually learned to lie. Or there are other reasons why people lie, but the way that people talk about in society when someone lies is you got to stop that, stop that lying.
She's frustrated. She just wants a guy she can trust. She wants consistency. And can you do that?
I'm the type of person that doesn't like to break people's heart. And I'd rather lie to them than tell them the truth.
Right. Okay, so that's another reason. And yeah, that is a pretty common reason as to why people will lie to their partners. I actually know people in my personal life who are like this because when they were young, they went through something. And that is my hypothesis about him, is that he went through an experience where he was required by role or by situation to please. And so, you put a 7-year-old in a situation where let's say they get a bad report card and their parents are very volatile or depressed, or your parents are very stressed out from another kid or from work or from their own mental health or something. And so your role in the family as you're developing your personality is to be accommodating and to please other people. And you get this report card and you're like, oh no, this is going to stress out my mom and I don't want that. So I'll lie. And then he goes home and then he lies to his mom and says, I got straight A's or something. And then she's like, oh, good. And then she's not stressed out. She goes back. And then eventually, though, if you repeat that enough times, you're going to get caught. And then that is retained into adulthood, and you will end up lying to people because you're trying to save the individual from distress. But of course, what you do is you create so much more distress for the individual when they catch you on those lies, right? A really common adult manifestation of this, and I'll talk about a friend that I have that is like this, is that he will say, I'll say like, hey, let's go to a movie together on Tuesday or something. And he'll be like, oh, okay, let's do it. But in his mind, he's like, well, I kind of have something else I have to do that night, like work or family or something. But he'll agree to go to the movie with me, even though he doesn't know if he can or not. He might even know he can't, but he doesn't want to disappoint me. So he says, yes, absolutely, let's go to the movie on Tuesday. And then 5 minutes before the movie, I'm waiting at the movie theater, he'll say, oh my God, I'm so sorry. I double booked, or I had this other thing, or I got the flu or something, and just make something up. So you do that enough times to, I'm going to start wondering, am I being lied to? What's happening here? It can be pretty disappointing, right? So you're kicking the can down the road, right? You're avoiding a little bit of distress now, but you're creating so much distress down the road. So he's admitting to that. And I think that emerged from his early childhood, I would guess, and his family role.
What else do you think's going on in Anfisa?
Also, he talks bad about me to his family. So they don't like me because of what he tells them about me.
So I just feel like she has this thought in her mind that that's what happens when I talk to my sister.
Well, I saw it when we were together.
So I'm always terrified of actually, I go through different emotions when I'm in a very familiar feeling right now when I watch therapy on this show, because when it starts, I'm like, oh, this is going to be great. It's going to solve all the problems, which is, of course, ridiculous to have that expectation. But I'm happy that they're in therapy. And then more times than not, as we see the session depicted as it is edited, but so God knows, I frequently am thinking, there's a lot of, I don't know what I should say. There's a lot of different styles of therapy out there. But then I have to remember, but it's edited, so God knows what really happened, At the very least, we can say that they're both right, that Anfisa has somewhat of a valid point that she doesn't like it when George talks bad about her to his family. Okay. But we could also see George's side of just like, I talk to my family sometimes on the phone, and Anfisa doesn't even want me to do that and is refusing to let me talk to my family unless she's sitting right there listening to the conversation. This episode is sponsored by BetterHelp. Let's talk about self-awareness. I'm often talking about a connection with the self, a connection with who you are, what you want, what you need, this kind of thing. And how for some people, since they weren't attuned to enough as a child, they don't have a strong connection with the self, and therefore they have to go through a lot of therapy to get in connection with the self. But really, I don't know anyone who doesn't cut themselves off from their needs. None of us were 100% attuned to 100% of the time. And of course, that's where therapy can help everybody. And as a therapist, I've witnessed clients discover mind-blowing aspects of themselves that really helped them in their lives. Well, that's where BetterHelp comes in. BetterHelp connects you with a licensed therapist who can take you on that journey of self-discovery wherever you are. It's entirely online. It's designed to be convenient and flexible to your schedule. So discover your potential with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/Kirk today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/Kirk.
So when you have money, that's when she spreads her legs?
Every time I speak with my family or something, she thinks that I'm speaking bad about her.
Yeah.
Oh, you are?
I'm not.
You are?
I'm not.
So in a way, you're discounting her feelings and saying you shouldn't be feeling this way.
Okay. I'm just going to assume it's edited, and I hope y'all see what at least I'm seeing, and I don't have to say it because, if I were filmed on this show, I'm pretty sure that if they edited it to make it look interesting or they wanted to make me look bad, or I don't know, they could easily do that because, they take a 50-minute session and they reduce it down to 2.5 minutes. So it cannot be a representation of everything that happened.
You have money, that's when she spreads her legs.
Every time I speak with my family or something, she thinks that I'm speaking bad about her.
Yeah, so at least the way it's edited, which we always have to think about, what George is saying is she doesn't want me talking to my family. And she thinks I'm talking about her or bad about her, which I'm not always doing. I'm talking to my family because I like my family.
Yeah.
Oh, you are?
I'm not.
You are?
I'm not.
So in a way, you're discounting her feelings and saying you shouldn't be feeling this way.
Yes.
What might help, George, is if you learn more empathy and just empathize what her feelings are.
If I didn't know better, I don't. Because there was that one therapist for Mike and Natalie that they had in Squim or around there, Doug or Dave or something. And I just thought he was fantastic. Every move he made, or at least most of it, I was just like, okay, good. What I'd want them to walk out of the first session was like, you know what? I feel validated, and I feel almost kind of like I understand my partner a little better in a way that makes me have more compassion for them. When they treat me badly, it's not great, but I always thought it was because they wanted to do that or they didn't care about my feelings. But now I'm learning that there might be some reason behind that. And my reasons are what I understand. And it seems like I'm coming across as triggering to that person. Both people having that perspective is what you want. And I wonder if they walked out of this first session with a little bit of that.
What they need is to just listen well with one another instead of defending and then attacking back, which just causes more anxiety and fighting. But it's going to take a lot of work with all young couples. It takes a lot of work.
That's why I would never agree to be on a show like this, because the producers of the show are not there to represent reality. They're not there to represent the therapist well. They are there to create compelling television that is interesting and emotionally evocative. So it's possible that there was balance in the session, that it went fairly well, and the producer said, okay, we need to extract every single sentence and maybe cobble things together because one of the things that I detect, I think I'm detecting, is the producers want there to be shifts where they want one person to be the bad guy and then they want the other person to be the bad guy. And I think they try to balance things out because I think they think that if they do that, it creates more long-time viewership or more interesting viewership. Think of like Gino and Jasmine, where there were times when you're like, whoa, Jasmine, you're like, whoa, Gino. And they have a way of eliciting that. Or Cole and Larissa is actually another good example of the first season was like, Larissa is this horrible person. And then later on, it's like, Colt is this horrible person. And now Debbie's the horrible person. I think they want that because they want to keep it on the edge. They don't want us as viewers to go like, oh, they're the evil person. It's sort of like with Angela and Michael. They will, even though that relationship seems pretty one-sided, I think they try in their way to make it seem like Angela's behavior might be a little justified. And there's a number, I won't go into the weeds on why I think, but I don't know. I mean, sometimes I wonder if they're actually doing the opposite. But if it's true, my original hypothesis about the producers and their motivation, and I realize there's a lot of producers and there's a lot of thinkers on board, but I wonder if the producers are like, okay, we've really had Anfisa looking bad for a while. And so now we need to balance things out. So we're going to include the bits where the therapist is blasting him because that will create more of a balance and will appeal to our audience or something. I don't know. I mean, it's really just a speculation upon speculation. It's a speculation party, if you will.
Do you guys want to have children down the road?
Yeah.
Potentially?
Honestly, right now, I just feel like everything's falling apart and I don't know how everything's going to work out.
Okay. How long have you two been married?
A year and a half.
Year and a half.
So she's crying. I'll just say what I would have done. is it's really a therapist trope at some point. It's a very common therapist sort of intervention or behavior to when someone especially starts to cry in a situation where you don't really even know what they're crying about. You might take a guess, but you want to create a space where that is welcome and encouraged, and because that's a better place to be than intellectual, at least for a time, right? So a very sort of tropey thing to say as a therapist is like, oh, what's going on for you right now? I see you're crying or you're having some emotion. What's going on? Because I'm guessing that some amount of pain is coming up for her, and that is probably at the core of all their, at least a lot of their problems. If she can say, I have a lot of traumas, or I desperately feel hurt because I feel abandoned a lot, or when he abandoned me in the past, I'm still holding on to that. I feel sad about that. And then for him to see that vulnerable side of her and to take care of her is a much better mode for them to be in. It's healing, but it's also not yelling at each other or hitting each other. He might be able to understand her better. Instead of seeing the angry, abusive, violent person, he would see the tender person. There's so many things that can be accomplished by focusing on her pain. She could be validated for it. She could feel like it's okay to be sad instead of constantly converting all that hurt and pain into anger and abuse.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, don't apologize. There's a good reason why we're feeling the way we're feeling. If your tears could talk, what would they say?
Okay, that's another like secondary tropey thing that therapists. A good question, and a question that is along the lines of what I was saying. So let's hear what she says.
I feel a lot of pain,
A lot of pain?
like emotionally. I wanted to have a family with George, and that's why I moved here. But I just don't think George wants to have a family with me.
Why not?
I don't know if I want to talk about it with cameras.
All right, I didn't know that. So she wants to have a family, and she thinks that George won't want to have a family with her, and that makes her sad. Okay. I'm guessing we're not going to see more of that session around her crying, and I'm just going to assume that the therapist really did a good job with that, held it, encouraged them. We see that George is showing altruism and compassion towards her in that moment. So, we'll just assume that that was a good therapeutic moment.
Is any of this related to at all?
No,
It's not.
it's not really about that.
So I think what they're referring to is that in the tell-all, I think they're referring to when he said or implied that she was working in some sort of adult industry. And Anfisa says, I don't think George was supposed to have a family with me. And then the producer says, does that have to do with the fact that, your job or something? Which wouldn't be the first thing I would have thought. I mean, it certainly could be a factor, but I would imagine that George, pretty soon after they started having a lot of fights, George started having questions about whether or not they were compatible. And so if he has any questions about whether or not they should have kids, I imagine it would be mostly based on that question. But it is interesting to see her tenderness and to see her actually feel safe enough to have these kinds of feelings both in the interview and in session. I'm really glad that she was able to go there, because that's where the therapy really begins and ends, is with her vulnerability and being taken care of without her converting it into anger and hostility.
He thinks that maybe I should just be happy because I'm in America, but he doesn't care that I left my family and everything I
do
had in
care.
Russia.
I do care.
I just feel like I don't have support here. I feel like I don't have anybody.
You feel homesick?
I feel like I hurt her so much, and I really don't know how I'm gonna get her trust back. Like, I know it's gonna take a lot of time.
Yeah, yes, but what about the other direction? I mean, they've both hurt each other a lot. At least in the edit of the show, we've seen her repeatedly hurt him. Is that going to be discussed, at least in therapy? And a temptation, given the way that they come across, would be to assume that the hurt is happening one direction. But I think he is in a tremendous amount of pain. And it would be only natural, given the way she treats him.
I'm sorry.
Okay, so as I suspected, we're not going to see much beyond that in the session. It'll probably be the only session that we see, let alone the only session that they even go to. I'm just going to assume that a lot of really glorious or, things that if I saw, I'd be like, okay, that was a good moment and a good move by the therapist. I'm just going to assume that was all there. All right, well, let's end it there. And everyone out there, please take care of yourself because you deserve it. You really, really do.